So welcome to VuePress, documentation made easy. My name is Ben Hong. Little known fact about myself, I'm a big Harry Potter nerd, in case it wasn't obvious. And so, yep, I've done the official house sorting and everything, so I am in the house of Ravenclaw, in case anyone's curious. As far as a little bit about me, I'm currently one of the lead front-end developers at Politico, if you've heard of us, a news media publication out in Washington, D.C. And I currently run the Vue DC meetup in the DC area and help to organize Vue meetups, which is a resource that you can use to locate to see if you have any Vue meetups in your area. And if you want to start one as well, I've also written an organizer handbook in there, so feel free to check that out for resources going forward. As far as a couple housekeeping items, the slides will be available online, so no need to worry about jotting down notes and stuff. I'll tweet them out afterwards once I've done compiling them. And for those who are on social media, those are the hashtags for you to use. So hashtag VuePress and hashtag Connect.Tech 18. And again, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram at BenCodeZen. Good? Yep.
Okay, you're using that.
Oh, we're good? Okay. All right, sounds good. All right, so to get started, let's take a stroll down memory lane. So I'm sure most of you know that feeling when you kind of woke up in the morning and you're first getting started. So you have your cup of coffee, you're ready to start a new project. So you're using Vue UI, the new beautiful Vue UI CLI 3, and you're starting your project, and everything's going great. And so you're ready to make magic happen. You have a Trello board, you have your tickets ready to go. And then once everything's set up, you're like, okay, I'm prepared to work on this feature, and you're doing some Googling, and you're like, okay, I'm going to need this library. And so you click on the repo, and you end up with this page. And you're staring at it like, crap, like that's not very helpful at all. And so you're just staring because again, did it not? It's not going through. Oh no, it's not playing. There we go. All right, sorry. But you get those readmes where it's infuriating because you have this library that you're clearly dependent on, and so you're not sure what to do, and basically you've just smash your computer in frustration. And so you gotta remind yourself to inhale, exhale. It's gonna be okay. Luckily, there are other links on Google besides the GitHub. And so you're like, okay, Stack Overflow. I see a question on there. It has my question. I'm gonna be good. And so for those that can't read in the back, just in case, I'll read this out. There's this XKCD comic, and it says, "Never have I felt so close to another soul, and yet so helplessly alone, as when I Google an error and there's one result, a thread by someone with the same problem and no answer, last posted in 2003. Who were you, Denver Coder 9? And what did you see?" So yeah, that feeling can be pretty frustrating. And so at the end of the day, what's the problem that we're dealing with? Part of me is convinced that when most people sign up to be a developer, this was mandatory reading for everybody. In case you can't see in the back, this is excuses for not writing documentation. And so what are some common excuses that some of you have had or even used yourself when it came to writing documentation? Anyone have any? Oh, not enough time. Yep, it's really common. Anybody else? Oh, it's going to go out of date. OK, that's a good point, too. Anybody else? Yeah, my code explains itself, right? Yeah, so I mean, there's just, so to your point, there's, the don't have time, docs are outdated, I have to rewrite the whole thing anyways. We'll get to it later. It's too hard, I don't like writing, feeling too lazy. And, future devs will figure it out. I think there are some people who probably believe that, that reading source code and having to dive through it will somehow, build character. But let's be honest, that's not something we typically love doing when it comes to getting something done. And so the key thing here is that documentation, as most of you are aware, is the key to any project's long-term success. This is particularly exemplified with the Vue docs. So as most of you are aware, a lot of people got into Vue primarily because the docs were so easy to read, self-explanatory, and you didn't need like a ton of help in order to get up and running. And so how many people here use Confluence? Anybody? Yep, fair number. OK. So Personally, I am not a big fan of Confluence for a number of different reasons. I could probably give a whole talk on the many things I dislike about Confluence, but some of it being things like not being able to have control over the design, the fact that your Confluence docs are completely separate from your code base, so there's this decoupling. And so, and the fact that you have non-standard markdown syntax, and just all these things are just make it for a very difficult experience as far as making sure your code is properly documented. So whenever I have a manager that's always like, yeah, by the way, could you write some documentation in Confluence? This is very much me at the end of the day. I need to get sound for this clip. But anyway, but wait, we're developers, right? When we have a problem and we don't like, we can build whatever we want. So we got this, all right? So we get our heads together and we get, okay, basic requirements. This is easy. We just need to be easy to write the documentation, easy to maintain. Let's make sure it's version controlled. The site will be responsive, and then we'll just make sure we can customize the design easy. Like, piece of cake, we can knock this out in like a session. But as most of you are aware, usually when it comes to start to do something, you get a lot of cooks in the kitchen. A lot of people start weighing in. Product wants their part, design wants to see their part. And at the end of the day, you sort of just like, all right, forget it. Like, I tried, not even going to bother. And so the reality is that good and living documentation is really hard at the get-go. Fortunately, though, all hope is not lost. So I'm sure some of you are like, all right, so tell me more about this VuePress thing. Now, for those, if you haven't watched Pride and Prejudice, it's this grand love story between someone who's very prejudiced about the other side and the one who is very prideful. And so what VuePress is if you took Vue and WordPress, and no, I'm just kidding. Contrary to the name, VuePress has absolutely nothing to do with WordPress. It's a very, very common misconception. In fact, I think there was someone who tried to create a WordPress library for Vue and called it VuePress, but then after this came out, they had to rename their library. So there's this common misconception that we have. OK, so what is VuePress? This is the official VuePress logo here. So VuePress is a static site generator that has a Vue-powered theming tool system and comes with a default theme that's optimized for technical documentation. I think those two things that are highlighted there are the key parts that differentiate VuePress from other static site generators, because as I'm sure most of you are aware, there are a lot out there. And so the fact that Evan built this tool solely with documenting for libraries and those things in mind, this is what sort of sets it apart from the rest of the tooling out there. So as far as getting started, it's pretty straightforward. All you need is Node, and you just need to install it as a dependency. That's all you need. The reason why it's optimized for technical documentation is because you're writing documentation with tools you already know. So you're using markdown files, and you have a config object that's just your basic JSON object, and that's pretty much it. And the great thing about it is that it can actually coexist in the same repo that you're building like your application in. So you just create a directory like docs, and VuePress you just point it at that directory, and it can build a static site generator. So that way it lives in the same code repository. And so this is particularly useful because a lot of times context switching can be very expensive, as I'm sure most of you are aware. So being able to write in your code editor, the moment you think like, oh, I need to update this tutorial or whatever we have for setup, you can immediately Command-P, switch into the file you need, and update that as part of your PR. And you don't have to, that way you have very little context switching, which is fantastic. And so in Chris Fritz's workshop yesterday, he mentioned that replacing some training with doc PRs is really a fantastic way to help onboard people. So when you have someone and a new developer starting on your project, having them run through like setup instructions, and then when they have things that are confusing, or they have things that can be improved, like having them issue those PRs is a great way, first of all, to get them involved, and that helps to keep the documentation living and up to date, which is a problem that, as you mentioned, a lot of you mentioned, is something that we have to deal with. And so, other things that you also get, which are awesome, is that you get hot module reloading. So as you're editing your README files, that actually opens up a web server so you can see everything happening live. And it already uses folder structure. So whatever directory you're putting your files in, it'll output that according to the URL path. You don't have to do any custom routes that you might normally have to do with like Vue Router and those things. Not necessary. It already respects the folder hierarchy. And what's also really cool about it are the built-in markdown extensions, which I'll get into now. So as every README file, most of you are probably aware that you can have front matter, right? So these are attributes that go with the page that you're working on. So you can see here I've defined like a custom page title, the language, some basic metadata that will appear as meta tags within the head, which is pretty awesome. And very, very much like Vue, in the event you're not a big fan of YAML, it also allows you to use just a basic JSON structure, if that's your preference. Doesn't constrain you at all and gives you your choice. GitHub style tables, those are automatically built in. So the moment you can, and it even has the alignment signatures. So you'll notice that in the row right here, that it has the colons on the side. So this lets it know that you're center aligning it, whereas the right, when you only leave the one colon on the right, it obviously right aligns it, right? So little things like that make the experience really, really enjoyable as far as creating these sort of elements on your page. Code syntax highlighting. I'm sure those that have tried to build their own, documentation site before, you wrestle with your team as far as like which, syntax library, highlighting library are you going to bring in, and all those things. Configuring that can be a pain, but this is already built in. Vue knows you're going to be inserting code snippets, and so all you got to do is append whatever language you already have, and it will just, output accordingly on the page. And so the difference in color theming is just that's my personal editor, and the right is like the default theme syntax highlighting. And so on top of code syntax highlighting, you even get line highlighting within code blocks as well. So you can see here, all you do is append your number. It already works, right? So this is a really seamless experience as far as really making sure that people can pay attention to what they need to and ensure that the right information is being conveyed to your readers. The other thing that I particularly love is that they created what they call custom containers. And so there are times that you need to just have these sort of banners appear in your markdown. And VuePress is taking care of that. So you can see all you got to do is the triple colon. And then there's 3 different types. There's tip, warning, and danger, right? And so those correspond accordingly, as you see, to the various outputs. But even better is that if you put a title after the type that you want, it automatically replaces the title with that. So you're not limited to say, so if you, after tip, you wrote like, this is a great idea, like that will replace the title. And so it's very customizable in that regard. And I've used that banner a lot in the documentation we write at work. And last but not least, you can get emojis too. So it has a built-in emoji library. You can go to the docs to check out the page, but you can see all you do is your colon, your emoji, and it just automatically appears, which just, again, just allows you to inject some fun and personality into your docs, which I think makes a big difference when it comes to creating documentation and allowing people like the joy of like, I'm going to create something that looks good, and it's going to be a lot of fun to use. So having covered that, we are going to switch to the other part of this definition that is the interesting part, and which is it has a Vue-powered theming system. And so, OK, tell me more. So with VuePress, you get Vue Magic within your Markdown file. So interpolation, that works within your Markdown file, like no configuration needed. So you can see even just a simple math expression, 1 + 1, it'll output 2, just as you would expect. Directives even work in your Markdown templates as well. So you can loop through a list of items, and it'll output it for you just as you would expect on any sort of Vue app. What's even cooler is that you can even access site and page data. So this might be a little small for the people in the back. Unfortunately, I couldn't get it zoomed in anymore. But as you can see here, you actually get access to the Vue dev tools as you're working on your documentation site, which is incredible. So you can see here, I just used the lang variable. And then coupled with what I talked about earlier with the front matter, that's accessible to you as well. within the page. So you can see here, I could add my own custom list within the YAML, and then all of a sudden, I have access to that for my loops. And it allows for, again, just really cool things that you can do and just being really clever about how you're documenting what's going on. And so the other thing on top of that is that it comes with this incredible default theme. And so I'm going to go ahead and switch the presentation over. Swap that over. All right. So as you can see here, this right here is the default theme that you get. This homepage is entirely customizable just with giving the config options. So the gigantic VuePress loader, that's just a hero image that you can populate with whatever you want. It has a title. It even has a CTA for you to get ready to allow your users to do what they want. Again, pre-populated, they know that you might need 3 different features. So if you do 2, it'll do 2-column. So this homepage is automatically ready for you to use outside of the box. But obviously, that's not as important. What's particularly cool is that all these things that we sort of forget about when it comes to a good documentation experience, like easy customizable nav bars, that's already done for you. So if we go down to, oh, this is weird because I'm not mirrored. Everything is responsive as well. So all these things have already been thought of and are ready for you to use outside of the box. And so little things that make the experience of using documentation that much better. The fact that as you scroll down, it actually automatically highlights the current section you're on. Little things like that you would have to normally, if you were building it yourself, might forget about or spend time to do. And then what's particularly awesome about VuePress is they have a built-in searching functionality. So what it does is it goes through all your markdown files and scrapes the headings. And so in the event I'm really curious about theming, all this stuff is generated at build time. So this is not like it's calling a database or doing some sort of asynchronous call. You get this for free. And it works remarkably well and just kind of shoots you over to the page you need. And with that said, that covers the theme. So let's go back. OK. And so, of course, there's going to be people who are going to want to create their own themes. And that's super simple as well. I'll leave that more to the documentation in case that's something you want to do. But that is totally an option in the event you want to customize your own theme. It's very straightforward. And there is one more thing that I want to cover. And that is the fact that you can use Vue components within your Markdown files. And this is just blew my mind. So you can see what I have here. This is just your basic project you saw from earlier. And so within the VuePress directory, there's a components folder that you have where you contain your single file components. And those are globally registered across your app. And so as you can see here, that's just a basic counter component, nothing special. It has your script template. And so here, I'm dropping in the counter. And you can see it works exactly as you would expect it on any sort of single page application. If you drop multiple ones, they have independent state, and everything just works right out of the box. And so this allows you to do some really great things as far as showing examples of the code that you're doing, or frankly, just giving great interactive interactions. So for example, one of the things we did at work was we had this device of libraries that everyone has to kind of figure out, what iPhones do we have, what tablets do we have for testing. And so we just had a JSON file that was brought into a Vue component where we created a dynamic sorting table. Right? We did that all within a Markdown, a Vue component in a Markdown file that goes up as a statically rendered site. And it's fantastic with the things that you can, it allows you to be very creative and to do what you want to do, and it just doesn't get in your way. And in fact, helps you out in so many regards. And so, it's just absolutely incredible. The Vue components. When I first saw that demo, I was just flabbergasted. Anyhow, as far as getting started, like most things with Vue, I would actually start with the official VuePress docs. So those are documented really well. There's actually a tutorial that someone wrote called VuePress Book, if you want to check out. I've looked it over. Some of the later material is a little bit outdated, but it'll get you started and enough on your feet so that you'll be able to get up and running. And so, hopefully, with that demo and sort of talking through a lot of VuePress functionality, hope a lot of you are feeling really motivated to go out and document, all your apps and just create awesome static sites with VuePress. So with that said, does anyone have any questions? Yes.
So in our projects, a lot of times we'll have a root level folder for components.
Yep.
Each component has a folder underneath that, and then every folder there's the .vue file, there's the SAS file, readme file, and anything related to just that component. So we have readmes for everything already.
Mm-hmm.
What would have to be done to get this into VuePress?
That would be a little bit complicated. So as you saw in the example earlier, let me just queue up my code editor. So that'll be easier. OK, so you'll notice that so in this particular project, VuePress is pointed at the docs directory within. So it's assuming you have like a source like you normally would. There's actually this .vuepress folder that's particularly special. And so that folder allows the compiler to know like what to look for. And so when it's outside of that scope, it actually will have sort of no idea. So I am not sure about this, but I imagine there might be a way to have the compiler like point at the folders you're instructing. But as far as out of the box, you have to make sure that the components actually live within the VuePress. So in your particular case, what we did instead for that case was we actually used Storybook instead for sort of like live documentation of components. And so in VuePress for us is used a lot more like a pattern library or sort of also like style guide for helping to onboard new employees and those sort of things. And that's a lot of what we use it for.
If we were to take those individual component folders and move them into the VuePress folder, would it pick up those readmes from there?
So you're saying you'll put the readmes at like the docs folder? So the Vue files have to live in the components directory. That's the problem. The readmes can live, as you said, in that structure. If you just copy with the readmes, that will automatically like populate everything. But if you want the actual Vue components, then that have to live in VuePress, unless you know.
I have one thing I can add. I happen to do this for one project, and in the VuePress config file, basically just ran a little node script to go through all the components, and copy those into the docs folder, so that when you run VuePress, it copies over all that stuff, then reads the config, and then runs.
Nice.
The downside is that if you are editing something, while you have VuePress running in dev mode, then it won't be copied again, so you have to restart it. But that's a way that you can hack around it.
That's clever. I like that.
Could you not do import from wherever your component file is into that folder so that you should have whatever name of the component is, and then inside of it it's just import and the name of the component as sort of a soft link?
Right. So one of the constraints of VuePress is that it doesn't have access to browser-level APIs at compile time. So the things that you're used to doing as sort of like the modules with import, it doesn't work, unfortunately. There are ways where you can do, I think, on a mountain lifecycle, it's a little bit more of an advanced technique where you can import libraries. But as far as the standard imports path, as you're mentioning, that is a browser-level API that doesn't have access to. Yeah. Nope, that's completely out of the box. And so they're registered as global components, so it's not like, as you can see, I didn't have to go in the markdown file and be like, by the way, I want you to import counter. It automatically is registered as a global component across the entire site, which is pretty great. Yeah?
So I guess organizational-wise, let's say I'm running various projects and I have lots of different components. Would I have one VuePress for all of it, or separate out the projects?
So you have one repository with?
Let's say I have two projects.
Okay.
Two projects.
Yep.
Each project has some shared components.
Okay.
Common library.
Yep.
I need to VuePress it all. I need to make it so I can do documentation anytime.
Right.
Would I have one VuePress for all of that, or two, three?
You could just have the one. Yeah, I think the key thing would be whether they're in the one code, if they're in the one repository or not. Because obviously they're broken up in 3 different repositories, and the one.
Common, and there's two projects.
Yeah. So if that's the case, you can totally have one single directory.
Okay.
and then per Chris's recommendation, have the script grab the according pieces, and then you should be totally fine. Yeah. Any other questions about VuePress or documentation practices in general?
How did you find the docs for VuePress? Are they ironically terrible? Or?
Well, I'm not sure if you wrote them, but I did. You did. No, the VuePress docs are written well. The difference is sometimes they don't have as many examples. So one of the things I've been trying to do, and as you go through, if you see examples, there's a lot of opportunity to submit PRs, and they're pretty easygoing about helping to improve their docs. At this point, one of I think the biggest things that they're trying to figure out is plugins for VuePress. So I know that a lot of people here are probably interested in like a blogging functionality with this, because this would be great to blog with your markdown files and then still be able to use things like components and then having your blog be static site rendered. But overall, it's been pretty decent, just needs more examples. And again, the fact that I needed to include a tutorial says a little bit about that, because otherwise I could have just pointed them at the docs. So that's, yeah, definitely something that needs to be improved. Yeah?
I have another question. Are there any features like using VuePress that you found, like, gosh, I really wish it did this, because this is still a problem that I have to solve? Like, it's pretty common.
Yeah, so a lot of times, so you'll want most of your site to be site rendered, but you might want small pieces of it to still do like API querying. And so because it doesn't have that import functionality, I have to, that's one of the things I've been meaning to dive into, is how to get it so that they do have a life cycle. I see, might as well bring it up in the docs. There you go. All right, let's see, browser. There you go. See, I'm just looking for browser API restrictions, and it's right there. OK. So I cannot read this, but oh, it's right here. Whoops. So yeah, it looks like there is a hook. Oh, here, the mounted. This is the example they gave. So yeah, apparently you can use the mounted in order to get into the async. But again, that's something I haven't been able to really prototype with. And so again, this is one of those things where I wish there was a better example for people to sort of test out. But I think that's the one thing I'm sort of wishing right now that I could have for my VuePress sites. So yeah. All right. Well, if you guys need anything else, you guys can reach me out on Ben Code Zen. And so thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.